Hey, this is Gordon Bonan. I'm a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm also a bonsai practitioner. And you're listening to Bonsai Time Podcast.
Welcome to the Bonsai Time Podcast, the tree hugger's number one spot for history, horticulture, and having fun. Today we have a special Earth Day episode featuring Dr. Gordon Bonan, a Colorado-based bonsai artist and climate scientist. Gordon's published work, both as an academic and an author, are diverse, but one topic of focus in his research is how our forests impact local cooling and rainfall and their role in a changing climate. We discussed both Gordon's scientific and bonsai experience to better understand how they relate and what the rest of us can learn from his perspective. And with that, bonsai on.
Just to kind of bounce on that idea, given your research focus and what you've done over the years and everything else too, and the communities you've engaged with, what are you most afraid of regarding climate change, and what are you most optimistic about?
We'll hold off on the optimism one.
Okay.
I think I think we're beginning. It's going to be there are lifestyle changes that are going to happen, and things that because of climate change, and things that we used to be able to do, we're not going to be able to do. Um, I think a lot in terms of like in the Southwest with those extreme heat waves, particularly this summer when. I think what was it? Phoenix was having, 30 or 40, something like I can't remember the exact number of days where temperatures were above 100. In those conditions, you don't go outside. You can't go outside. And
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that in Phoenix or in Arizona, a lot of the lifestyle, if you want to do outdoors things, you either do it in the early in the morning or late in the evening. You're switching more towards a nocturnal lifestyle.
Mm,
This is where you do construction work and stuff like that, or if Kevin, if landscaping.
right.
And what I'm saying is that's happening in Colorado too. We're getting these brutally hot days, and we're a mile high. The solar radiation is really intense. The air is really dry. A lot of those middays, you just can't go out. And what I'm realizing is, I'm switching more towards an early morning, late evening type of lifestyle if I want to do stuff outside. Um, but there are more dramatic things than that going on too. Skiing, obviously, is going to
Right.
be an industry that maybe this idea that you could go skiing frequently, or there'd always be fresh powder, that might change in the future. Um, this idea of I'm trying to think of some other examples.
Mm,
I just think things we sort of took for granted, we're not going to be able to uh, take for granted anymore. I think part of it is actually going to be in terms of our landscapes. The
mm.
trees that we grew up with, or may not be the trees that we're going to see in our suburban landscapes in the future. And it's not just,
Yeah.
it's not just necessary climate change. You mentioned the emerald ash borer.
Mm.
It's diseases and insects that are coming through, and our forests are changing, and our perception of what we want our landscapes to look like is going to be changing too.
Yeah. I mean, even speaking of availability of material, like you were just talking about with emerald ash borer and things that are still here and there with that. Just this summer, I had a lot of clients that wanted dogwoods, and I always try to do similar native dogwoods, like the flowering dogwood, being that it's from here, it can grow here pretty well. Pretty consistent shade is ideal for it. But they were having such a limited run of access to material because where it's grown in the southeastern parts in that area, they had a huge run of disease and pests that were primarily focused on the dogwoods. So there were so limited availability that people were like, oh, and that was my educational component to my clients. Like, well, here's a thing here that we need to learn from, is that just because it's native or can be available to grow in our climate doesn't mean that it's always going to be there. They're like, wow, in that way of, they're a lot older than I am. they have had more time on this earth in this realm of where they live. But that little bit of that existence in this time now, it opened that conversation, like we were just saying, in relation to we may not have everything that we're used to, but hopefully, maybe in my opinion, hopefully we can bonsai it, just keep it alive
Yeah.
and small.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I think so. And I really think that by bonsifying it, if that's the right word, it's teaching you how hard, how hard it is actually for trees to grow and, in the conditions under which they grow. And it makes you really value them. But yeah, that's a really great example, the availability of trees. Like in Georgia, I know that they had a bad peach crop this year because of the change fluctuations in temperature. I think the same thing I heard was happening with cherries in like Michigan or something.
Mhm.
I think had read about that because of changes in temperature in springtime. Yeah, they're getting they're not the freezes are coming in at the wrong time and things like that,
Yeah.
or they're it's warming up and then cooling down and freezing, and they're just having a lot of things that we sort of take for granted that we may not be able to keep doing.
Yeah, it is those late freezes that we're even seeing everywhere that's coming in
Yeah,
to even extended parts where it should be early spring, almost middle of spring in some areas, where it is killing those early buds that are going to flower to create those fruits, right? And then you don't have the
yeah,
pollinators and all that. So it's like, what a dilemma. Yeah, yeah. It's a
yeah,
whole mix of everything.
Yeah, it's a complicated kind of area. So I, being a guy that works on diseases, it's kind of a convergence of factors. You got climate, which applies one form of pressure on the plants. You got like herbivory or insect herbivory, another type of pressure. And then there's all these infectious diseases, and they thrive at different temperatures also. So if it gets warmer or a longer spring or something, that could enable more of those diseases to spread. But I did want to ask you, Gordon, about one thing. So there are some plants, despite all of the changes going on in the world, that are doing well, and those would be like invasive plants. And this is kind of an area I'm interested in, but it is also its own crisis that's not as reported on as the climate crisis. And I was wondering how you see the global biodiversity loss crisis as linked to climate change, or is it? Do you have any models that show what the impact of invasive species might be on the health of our forests or their impact on the climate?
no, but no. So that's sort of an area that I'm not working in myself. But I will say that invasive species are another would with the premise that the type of vegetation matters in terms of climate. Whether it's say a pine forest or an oak hickory forest or a birch, New England sort of northern hardwood type forest. Yeah, or whether it's grassland or shrubland and stuff, all that matters to climate. And so invasive species, by changing the character of the ecosystem, will end up changing climate. Uh, and but I think more to the point of what you're getting at is the biodiversity issue is part of what makes the idea of natural climate solutions so complicated, is because if you want to suck up carbon and take it out of the atmosphere and you want to do it with four ecosystems, plant forests wherever you can. But then, yeah, that's changing a lot of the, if you're recreate, you're one idea at one point was just plant forests everywhere, but of course that then changes the nature of the ecosystem. And so, for example, if it was a savanna landscape and you try to increase the amount of trees on it, you're completely changing the landscape there, and
Mm,
you're contributing to the biodiversity problem. So what they're trying to do now with natural climate solutions is link that to biodiversity and say that the type of ecosystems that should be promoted or cared for or regrown in the future should also at the same time be trying to promote biodiversity. And I think that's a really, I like that. I like the idea of combining these two aspects of forests, that they both have a climate benefit to them, but they also have a biodiversity benefit. Maybe some of these benefits outweigh the other, but the net benefit is, as a whole is okay. Well, yeah, let's try to get forests growing again because it will help with climate. It will help with the biodiversity problem. And in this case, tropical forests just always sort of stand out as a place to try to prevent deforestation, try to promote the regrowth of forests, because it's both beneficial to climate, but also then really protecting a lot of the biodiversity hotspots.
That
Mm.
makes sense.
That's I'm learning so much just in relation to extrapolating my own information that I have. So this is a wonderful time because it's like, oh yeah, I'm right on the money and understanding and with this even a small amount of things, but seeing it in the relation that you've done so much research and things and how you've attained this knowledge. How do you go about in considering effective ways to change human behavior or educating the public surrounding this idea or creating new habits for new people? Do you think that we could do it through bonsai in smaller niche communities to a bigger outpouring? And that's a
Well,
loaded question, but
okay, no, there's a lot there, and I want to back up a little bit. And everything I'm talking about, we can actually see in the urban landscape or the suburban landscape. The
mm,
idea that, for example, planting trees by creating shade will create a cooler microclimate. That's like well understood.
right.
Um, that same tree will be taking carbon out of the atmosphere, not nearly as much as in a forest, but it'll be doing that. It'll also be improving air quality. It If you create the right type of sort of urban park, it promote biodiversity. It would also
Mm,
help with water storage by having porous soils and infiltrating. And so, Kevin, what I want to say is like a lot of what I study is more abstract, sort of global problems.
mm,
I think what you're doing is actually you're hands-on, and you're actually in the field, and you can actually implement solutions as part of the landscape design. And so like there's this whole the same way I was sort of saying like the conservation is my aesthetic of what I'm doing with bonsai.
mm,
There's this whole aesthetic and landscape architecture of like ecological design. And
right.
it's like it's landscape design an art form, or is it more sort of an ecological aesthetic? And I've always sort of gravitated toward the ecological aesthetic of landscapes. Yeah, the same way I'm doing that with my bonsai. And I think we can manage our urban and suburban landscapes, our
Mm,
residential landscapes, for climate change. And I think that's probably where a big impact is going to be felt. But it's exactly all the same issues that I've just been talking about. I just talk about in terms of global or continental to global scales. And the same things show up locally. I don't have
yeah,
much to
yeah.
do with that because I don't work at that local scale, but you can see these
Yeah.
same solutions at the local scale.
Well, it really does help in relation to being able to extrapolate the information you have available to us and then give it back to the community in a way that's engaging for them. Like you were
Mhm.
saying, the way you relate to your trees and or how you related like art to the scientific approach to your trees, right? Well,
Mhm.
isn't your art form your scientific approach then? Because art can be anything and how you relate it to
Yeah,
yourself. Because
yeah,
as I always say, broken record as I am, we're always just searching for our personalities in our trees. We're trying to
yeah,
create that component. So you
yeah.
yourself are, which is a really cool concept in a way that I think a lot of people who are in certain capacities of work or careers can reflect on what you're doing too and how you attain your art form.
Yeah.
I really think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. Because yeah, you're right. I do have I use the word aesthetic because I thought that's like the right word to use, but this is my design principle, and this is
Mm,
what guides me. But it also is what I feel comfortable with. It's what I'm happy with. And I think that's the big thing is we all have to find like what we're happy with and
mm,
what and in bonsai, I appreciate that bonsai is an art form, and you can see there's some amazing trees out there. And it's like, how did they do that? And it's just like everything is perfect.
mm,
And I sort of know that I don't have the visual acumen to do that, but I do know that there are other ways of making my trees insightful and meaningful.
Mm.
And hopefully, that type of knowledge gets out to people, and they really say, "Oh yeah, there's more to forest than what I thought." These are complex sort of uh, organisms that and we really need to be respecting them.
Yeah, and I think having these conversations like we're having now and just future conversations with anybody who will listen or wants to engage will be ideal because if we don't act, we won't learn. If we don't learn, we'll keep repeating the same process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have some questions that we put out for our listeners or on the web,
Instagram. Yeah.
in Instagram and other platforms, asking what their ideas are because they're not able to be on the conversation with us. Are you okay with answering some questions that they exclusively asked for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I assume you'll sort of forward them to me or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to read them
Yeah.
right now for you.
You're going to read them now. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's
Yep.
fine.
So we actually
Okay.
got one that was kind of related to Kevin's last question. So this is from Bonsai Mike 2020 on Instagram. He's the president of the Akron Canton Bonsai Society here in Ohio. And so I think he's thinking along similar lines of questioning. So kind of like your research, Gordon, is showing the value of forests. And then a lot of bonsai people are trying to think, how can we use bonsai to educate the public about this kind of big topic? So the question that he asked is, bonsai brings ordinary trees to eye level and presents beauty that might otherwise be unnoticed. In this way, it can change attitudes towards nature. How can we use the aspect to make, or this aspect to make people see the value of trees, nature, and the environment? Do we need to exhibit more? So I don't know if you have any ideas about that, about using bonsai as a educational vehicle.
Here's what I probably so yeah, exhibiting is really good, but exhibiting seems to me like it always focuses on the art and
Mm.
what's the right, how do I want to say it? The layout, the placement of the tree,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
is it in the perfect pot?
Mm.
Does it have moss on it? Does it have a right background? Uh, and and like I said, I appreciate that. And it makes you sort of realize, oh yeah, these trees are just outstanding. But I think maybe what we also need to do is actually start talking about the functioning of trees,
Mm.
and what does it take to actually grow a tree in a bonsai container. And that's when you sort of realize, okay, I better have a really good porous soil mix, because if it's really compacted, then my tree is going to not have, it's going to be waterlogged. It's going to have too little oxygen. It's going to not have enough nutrients. It's going to die. Well, that's exactly the same principle that you better have in your backyard too, to
Yeah.
grow anything. And so I think maybe, so what there's this in art that, or no, even like in form and function and stuff like that. And I think, maybe the current bonsai practices, really emphasize form, and bonsai shows really emphasize form. Maybe we also have to start talking about functioning. Yeah.
Mm. And that's an awareness too of bringing that idea to the public, right? Just not in those regulatory shows or exhibits, as you said. In part two of why Ryan and I started the first ever bonsai club at the Ohio State University is just to engage students and kind of relate them back to this connection to nature that they have, and their also impact that they have on the surrounding nature too. So, like,
Mm.
would you like to see more of an exploratory exhibit where there's functionality in bonsai representing actual ecosystems?
Yeah, and maybe that's a way of doing it. Yeah, there was actually one. I thought it was really neat at the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society show this September. Somebody had made a little marsh and
Wow, that's cool.
put that together, and that was bonsai. And it's like, yeah, okay, I like that.
That's really
Because
cool.
then she is thinking about, okay, how do I make a marsh? What type of plants grow in there?
Mm.
What kind of soil mix are we going to need? How do I keep it really well watered? Uh,
Mm.
and I just thought that was really fun to see something like that. So maybe that's sort of what we need. We need something more beyond just the individual trees in their container that are perfectly styled and really fussed over and it look great. those trees look really great. But I guess we also need to start thinking about something that talks about sort of the ecosystem as a whole and what
Yeah.
the trees are doing in the ecosystem. And I'm not sure how to go about doing that. I'm not sure but like I said, I saw there was a marsh, and I thought that was just so much fun.
Ah, that's really cool. Is there any pictures floating around of that? Do you know?
There might be. The Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society puts out their takes pictures of everything. I haven't looked to see what they actually put out this year, but I know if you go to their website, they
Yeah.
always have photos of all the individual trees. So that
Hmm.
might be in it.
I'll have to reach
Yeah,
out.
I'll track
I'm a
that
member,
down.
and I'm a
Yeah.
member of the club, so I'll reach out to you and then see if I can get something, and we
We'll
can
put
Yeah.
post
it in the
that.
show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question from a listener named Bonsai underscore Bentley. What's the biggest impact of relative humidity to a tree in a bonsai pot? If you have that as a simplified notion on your end, or can you extrapolate more on how that is relation
The
to the whole
ecosystem wide,
atmosphere?
maybe,
Yeah, I
and
was gonna say.
Oh
on
yeah.
growth
Okay.
of
Yeah.
forests.
Yeah. So that's a big thing. A big part of our models. One of the big impacts that not just trees but any plants have on climate is through transpiration.
Mhm.
And the amount of water that goes into the atmosphere, and then that has feedbacks on atmospheric temperature, humidity, clouds, everything. So we actually model transpiration. Um, so I'm going to answer that from a modeling point of view, from my modeling world. Whether this is horticulturally right, it is right, but precise is another question. It's all related to stomata then,
Mhm.
because the stomata on the plant has to be open to get the carbon dioxide to come in,
Right.
but as it's open, the water diffuses out through transpiration. And what's happening with relative humidity is the drier the air is, there's a greater pull on the water. The cohesion tension idea of water flowing from the soil through the roots and the stem and out the leaves. There's a greater pull on the water that can increase transpiration. But on the other hand, the stomata close because if they're losing too much water, they start getting desiccated. So the stomata are trying to close, and there's this optimal sort of balance between being open to take up carbon dioxide and close to prevent water loss. So relative humidity is probably is one of the big sort of drivers, I'd say, of one of the big things we actually include in the effects of relative humidity on stomata are one of the big sort of fundamental things we do in our climate models now. And it's the way in which vegetation really impacts climate. But I would say also in our bonsai world too, it's something that really has a big impact. Um, in some ways, maybe more than the temperature. This is
Hmm.
where, okay, this is where I'm getting dicey, horticulturally, precise. But I think relative humidity, or more technically, what we call vapor pressure deficit, which is the difference between the leaves, which are saturated with moisture, and the air, which is dry. That's a
Mhm.
really big driver of the plant behavior.
Hmm. Mhm. Similar to that of like a greenhouse, if you will, where I'm in the greenhouse productions class right now in systems management, and we talk about vapor pressure deficit, relative humidity daily in relation to how these environments are also engaging in their enclosed, but also man-made. But in
Mhm.
relation to my professor who's from Japan, Dr. Kubota, she's always relating it to look at what's happening in our real environment too, outside of this
Mhm.
enclosed, panelized, man-made
Mhm.
uh, impact here. And so that explanation works really well.
The one thing I'll say, okay, about it is, again, and this is sort of like the wonder and awe of trees. Colorado is a pretty dry climate.
Mhm.
We're we can have days of 10% relative humidity and stuff like that.
Wow.
Even, 30% would be considered fairly moist. And yet trees do okay.
Mm.
Yeah. Yes, you do have to, but this is all then part of your management of your trees in your container. You then want to water them, realizing that, okay, if it's hot and sunny and the low relative humidity, there's going to be a lot of transpiration on those
Mhm.
trees, so the soil is going to dry out. So how do you fight that? How do you sort of, alleviate that? You make sure that you keep on top of the watering and make sure that they they have a good amount of water available for them. But yeah,
Right,
20
right.
10% relative humidity and growing spruce trees in Colorado in my backyard. Yeah, it seems to work.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
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 Mm. Yeah, certainly. Like I would guess that a lot of the native Rocky Mountain species are kind of adapted to that arid.
Yeah.
Um, you know, they may have stomata that close more readily, or like thicker cuticles or things like that. One
Okay.
thing. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. You're right. Okay, so I was describing trees that are sort of adapted to this. I actually like tree ferns. I think tree ferns are like an incredible, um, plant. I've seen, people actually grow those. I actually, I have not tried to grow those as a house plant. I thought you could actually grow them as a house plant, but I've decided not to do that because, again, in our environment in Colorado, there's no way a tree fern would grow here.
Right.
So you're right, you have to be careful. You have to know sort of what grows in your environment and what does best there. And that
Hmm.
um, I actually did try to grow a cocoa tree. I thought that'd be really fun to grow a cocoa tree. And all that happened is the leaves turned brown immediately because it's just too dry.
Right. Right.
Indoors. Yeah, I kept it inside, but even especially indoors, in Colorado, the houses are just really bone dry. And so anything you're going inside just gets desiccated really easily. So, I would say the big lesson is to understand your environment and where you're living in the world and what your environment can offer versus what the plants need.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is a good thing to consider. I had done a while back, like my first lecture for the Columbus Bonsai Society. It was kind of about different tools you can use in an indoor growing environment to help your plants grow better, even though indoor growing is dry, like you were saying, or doesn't get that much light or not that warm compared to a tropical place. But anyways, I in that lecture I had cited papers that they had done different studies showing, for example, that plants grow better if you have everything else the same, but give some of them more humidity. They'll gain, uh, they'll basically grow faster with the higher humidity conditions. And so it's probably like you were saying because of the stomata being
Mhm.
able to be open for longer. So understanding how you can help your trees through that, or to have that kind of condition would definitely be good. The only downside that I want to add is that one thing I noticed here is that when you have higher elevated humidity, local humidity, then you also have more risk of fungal growth. So there's got
Right.
to be a sweet spot in there for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I was definitely just talking about it from a transpiration point of view, but you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's why I guess that's the question. Like, are you supposed to mist your trees and things like that, to help
yeah.
with humidity? But then you're going to start exposing them to fungus and
Yeah,
other.
and I think Bentley is in Louisiana. Is that right, Kevin? So he
No,
may have a lot of humidity
he's
du
in the
jour.
Carolinas. He's in
Oh,
Carolinas.
Carolinas.
So he just moved, so he's in a different climate now.
Mhm.
He literally just moved to a new house in a completely different zone, I believe, or just complete different climate, like I said. So he's still getting used to that. But within his
Mhm.
environment he was in before he moved, it was very kind of back and forth. But no, you're thinking of Louisiana is Joel. Joel's the next
Oh yeah,
question
yeah.
you're gonna ask.
Well, well, we can go to Joel's question next. He was asking, what's the best way to buffer some increased temperatures with our trees in pots? Do you have any ideas on that, Gordon?
Well, yeah. So there's a science answer to that, which is um, about the heat transfer in soils. If you have really a bigger mass of soil in a bigger container will help buffer them. A thicker like bonsai pot, the edge of the pot will help
Hmm.
too.
Mhm.
Um, but what I end up really doing is so we can actually calculate how quickly soils warm up, and that again is part of our climate models. Is we're modeling soil temperature and the diffusion of heat in the soil because how much heat gets stored in the ground is a big part of the climate. So dealing with thermal conductivity and heat capacity and all that kind of stuff, which is ultimately what's going on in a bonsai container too. But what I do here in Colorado is I tend to err on the side of bigger containers. And this is actually something that I think Todd Schlafer has finally accepted. He likes to put things in really small containers. And when I've seen things in small containers, it's really beautiful. It's really amazing. If you get the right container for the right tree, I mean, it's just outstanding. I tend to use bigger containers, and it's for two reasons. One, it's for the soil moisture problem because I can't water them twice a day and stuff like that. But I think it's also for heat mass. It's like how do you keep your container from warming up? And
Mm.
I guess, I also grow stuff in like black nursery containers, and those things just like heat up. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised anything can actually grow in those things. They're so hot. I've tried painting those containers white so that they reflect more sunlight. I haven't
Mm.
actually done the experiment to see if that helps or not, but just intuitively, they shouldn't be absorbing as much light. But anyways, what I really do, so I use bigger containers, and then because we're in a really bright, sunny environment, most of my stuff is actually in under shade cloth or under pergolas and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I'm reducing the amount of sunlight on them, and then I have them in big containers, and that seems to be working.
That's that's good news. And
Yeah.
there's a lot
But
of studies.
Louisiana is a different climate. That's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, because
you're
their
dealing with
humidity
different
is wow.
yeah, you're dealing with different challenges down there. But you know,
There is what you were saying about with nursery grow containers compared to black or white. There have been some substantial studies done throughout the last probably I would say if I had to guess 10 years, being that the industry for nursery production is very big in America, obviously. There have been studies. I We had to research some of them for some of my classes. I can't remember everything because I'm so
yeah,
loaded on so much information right now.
yeah,
But if you're interested, there are some good studies out there relating temperature difference and deflection of heat with white to black or other colored containers that they used. It was very interesting in relation to what was growing and what wasn't, in the significance of the heat transfer to the balance of the gas exchange and everything else.
yeah.
Um,
Intuitively, it makes sense to me. I mean, it's the same reason why you're always told to wear white clothes, in the
right.
summertime and stuff.
Mhm.
I've also tried cloth grow bags and things like that, thinking that they are going to be a little bit more porous and to let some of the heat, if the soil does warm up, the thought was that might let the heat air exchange between the soil
Hmm.
more easily and dissipate some of the heat. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's for non bonsai containers. That's the type of things I've been trying to experiment with.
That'd be interesting to see what you come up with that in a
Yeah.
couple of years more. Now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by the Columbus Bonsai Society. As with all local bonsai clubs, we are focused on providing education, outreach, and a local community to enjoy bonsai together in Central Ohio. Join us for our monthly meetings, annual wild, invasive, and native bonsai club digs, and our annual show, which this year takes place on July 20th through 21st at the Agriculture Administration Building of Chadwick Arboretum on the Ohio State University campus. Find more information and connect with us at columbusbonsai.org and on our YouTube channel, Facebook group, and Discord chat. Now, back to the Bonsai Time podcast.
Another listener question from Connor Mara Bonsai is about Yamadori. And, you had discussed your time of going hunting, if you will. And I believe you said you got two ponderosas, and
Yeah.
those are still going good. You got them
Yeah,
still?
I've had them for a year and a half now. They're still in the original collected container. I think actually, well, no, well, I'll tell you what, I signed up for another class with Todd in the fall, a year from now in the fall, because that's the time to work with pines. And
Mm,
that's my plan is to finally start doing something with
awesome.
those pine trees a year from now.
That's exciting. That's
Yeah.
exciting. Um, Connor's question is Yamadori hunting damaging to biomes and areas where growth is harder and biodiversity more scarce? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So there is a lot of ethical issues, I think, related
Mm,
to Yamadori collection, and I definitely think you can there. The idea of over picking an area, I think, is very real, and you know, but they're still so nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, in
Yeah.
that
And so
relation too, is it the fuel for the fires happening, or is it creating
yeah.
more of
So
a dissonance? You know what I mean?
so there are a lot of ways you can go with this. I think there are a lot of justifications one could do because one could say, okay, the type of Yamadori that is being collected is going to be really small, and it's not going to have much impact on the overall ecosystem,
Mhm.
and particularly maybe if it's like these are scattered trees on rock outcrops and stuff like that. But I think you also have to realize too, like particularly in the Rocky Mountains, like these things are 70, 50, 70, 100 years old. They've been around for a long time. And, what gives us the right to just sort of go in and pluck them out
Mm,
to sort of say we want to do something with them? So, but I trust somebody like, so I've gotten stuff through Todd Schlafer at First Branch Bonsai. And, I trust him. He's a professional. I trust what he's doing. And, he knows how to get them in a sustainable manner. But I think that's a really important issue. Is it sustainable or not?
mm.
And we, as part of the Yamadori collection that we did for the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society, there was actually like a 2-hour presentation on the ethics of collecting Yamadori.
That's great.
And part of it was this idea of you just see groups go in there and just sort of wipe out an area.
Yeah.
And I will say that when I asked why the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society hadn't done any Yamadori for its members, and they hadn't done it for a long time, and this is what the issue that came up was because they had done it in the past, and they sort of felt like the areas were getting over collected
Yeah.
and getting wiped out. So there are concerns with it, but I like to convince myself that the right people are doing it ethically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then I'd also sort of say, like, oh, isn't there a concept of like urban Yamadori too? I think
Yeah.
that's sort of what
Yardadori.
Yeah.
you were,
Yeah.
And
So we
that's
do a
yeah,
lot out
perfectly
maybe,
here.
sustainable because those are just going to the trash otherwise. So,
yeah, and maybe that's something we can. Okay, so like I'm spoiled, and I discovered, like Yamadori from the Rocky Mountains, which will really change your view of bonsai. But I think there is a lot of stuff that can be done in the urban landscape too.
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah. A lot of stuff we've gotten here in Ohio is from that. Otherwise, we have a lot of deciduous older forest and growth where Ryan and I are Ryan's idea that he's brought me in on about doing some tests and experiments with certain times of seasons to trunk chop larger trees. Mind you, we're doing not big groups, but enough to have a consistent
Scattered. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, we're still working on it, but definitely our friends for right now are the ones that are getting rid of their trees in their landscape
Mhm.
and just playing with that. And it's a nice sustainable approach, like you said, the recycle, reduce, reuse. We learn a lot about that way, and it's sometimes easier to manifest the idea for people who want to get into digging to dig in that way as opposed to going destroying an ecosystem, not destroying, but possibly undo an ecosystem that's been there for a century or more. And like you're saying, it's that when do you know when to not dig and when do you know when to dig? Similar to like what happened in Japan, right? There's a reason you can't dig in Japan at all anymore because the over influx of people just haphazardly, oh, here's a tree from the mountain, let's go dig. It's a whole thing. I know my father-in-law owns property somewhere on a mountain in his area of Japan, but I asked him like, oh, can we dig there? He's like, no, you'll go to jail because it's still that dynamic. It's like, no, you can't, you have to leave it there. So yeah, that's a really interesting approach, especially being you're right at the mountains in the Rockies. It's that idea of when do you leave it and when to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll plant a couple more seeds about like how to make that decision. of when to leave it versus when to try to dig it. So one thing that we'll do here in Ohio is we'll be digging, say, deciduous trees. And so we're usually finding younger trees in the forest, but if it's like a species that is not that abundant in the forest in the particular area that I'm digging in, I'll probably defer to leave it and let it get full size and make more of itself. And then there's also the consideration of if it's a forest where there's not many young trees, maybe you want to leave. In our case, they are young trees because we don't have the naturally stunted rock pockets that you guys have. But
Mm-hmm.
so it's good for people to be kind of aware about how the trees that they are collecting fit into the natural ecology. A couple young trees in an area that has many of them is not a big impact, or a couple small naturally stunted trees in an area that has full-size trees that are shedding seeds and going to make more also is not a huge impact, is kind of how I look at it. But then you do want to practice and be humble before you go for like the nicest, oldest tree,
Mm.
That's the briefest way that I will add to
Yeah,
that.
no, I think you're talking like a deciduous collection and deciduous forests around
Mhm.
Ohio. Yeah, yeah, that's a probably that. Okay, so I haven't lived in that. I've been in Colorado for 34 years now, so I
Oh,
haven't
wow.
lived in that type
Mm.
of environment in a long. But yeah, I like what you're saying, which is you really have to understand the forest and how the forest is regenerating, and if
Mhm.
there's a lot of saplings or something like that in it, yeah, that look interesting, yeah, that are worth, maybe you can actually do something. But if it's a very, if there's not much regeneration going on, you probably want to leave things alone. So I think I like that aesthetic.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to earlier we brought up invasives briefly, and I had read some article about how certain invasives were taking over and suppressing the regenerating like next generation of trees. So like in that kind of place, it's more important to leave the regenerating younger trees. But
Hmm.
Mm.
yeah, it does. It's kind of something that everybody has to keep learning about and try to stay aware of, so that we can keep getting Yamadori.
Mm.
Hmm.
Okay, so now we have a more lighthearted question from the real Chatter Man. His question was, "Are we doomed with regards to climate?" What do you
Oh
think?
yeah, I don't think somebody you had mentioned that earlier too. You said what are the things I've noticed and what are the things that scare me or something. And I said I
Yeah.
wasn't going to answer the.
The
Oh
optimistic, yeah.
no, it was actually the optimism. Yeah, yeah. No, hmm, we know what the problem is. We know what the solutions are. We know what the changes are going to be, and we just have to find the will to do it.
Mm.
And uh, I don't think we're not we're not doomed in the sense that this is an unsolvable problem scientifically. I think it's I, I, we know the solutions, and you may hear still people say, well, they don't believe in climate change or there's doubt about climate change. No, it's real. There's no doubt in the scientific community at all. And I think what's happening is now people are beginning to experience it themselves. They can always blame it, say there was just weather fluctuations and stuff like that. And that's true. But the science tells you there's more going on than that. But I think the challenge is it's a political and social problem. The solutions are going
Mm.
to come politically and socially. And whether we have the wherewithal as a society to solve it that way, I can't say.
Mm.
But we do know what the solutions are. We just have to start implementing them. And it's going to be, people will have to start making choices about their lifestyle. And
Mm.
that's, I think that's where the hard problem is ultimately it comes down to lifestyle choices. What do we expect out of our cars, in terms of, do we want, in terms of mileage, do we want to just be able to, Thanksgiving's coming up, do we just want to be able to travel wherever we want to visit family? And the reason, you would like to visit family too, but it has a huge sort of cost to it.
Mm.
And so I think we all are just going to have to start deciding what we value ourselves. And that's the hope is that we will collectively come to that decision. And my feeling, and this again gets back into why I do bonsais, because bonsai is making me make the right decisions. Because I want
Mm.
to see trees, and I want to see trees be main the trees that I'm familiar with and like, and I want to see those maintained and thrive. And bonsai is sort of my one way of helping me come to terms with that.
Mm.
So, if I may, I mean, you can be as personal as you want with this, but what types of right decisions are you making in your life that uh, are examples of how we can kind of help with this climate problem? I'll try to provide some resources in our show notes to give people more ideas also, but if you have any, that
Or
would
even
be
how
helpful.
Ryan and I can do our lives better, which can impact
Yeah.
our communities.
Mhm.
So I'm going to start off with some stuff that I don't expect that not everybody has is fortunate enough to be and has the opportunity to do. But
Mm.
we have solar panels on our house. For a long time, we've been supportive of the wind industry. Even paying a surcharge on our electric rates to get it out of wind. Um, we have one car is an electric car, a Leaf, but the other car is a gas guzzler. We need that, especially if you want to go in the mountains, you need
A
your gas
backup.
guzzler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'll just say range anxiety is a real issue.
Mhm.
Just recently, we converted, from our natural gas to a heat pump.
Mm.
So these are then, in terms of landscaping around my house, it's all sort of native landscaping. It's all
Mm.
low water landscaping, stuff like that. So, I've made those choices to do that. And I can do that, because of where I am, personally and professionally and things like that, and where I live. Not everybody has those opportunities, but I think it's just asking these questions, trying to understand better this idea of carbon footprint. Everything
Mm.
we do has a carbon cost. And what is that carbon cost? And here's something as an example that I thought was really kind of interesting. Um, where I work, we do a lot of traveling for science. Unfortunately, a little dirty secret of science is there's a lot of travel involved with it. You're
Mm.
expected to go to a lot of meetings, but there's a carbon footprint of those meetings. I'm actually trying to reduce. I don't like travel, those, and I'm really trying to reduce my travel. But there's a colleague from the UK who I was explaining sort of travel and how we budget our travel and things like that in terms of dollars. And we have a fixed dollar amount that we can travel each year. And he was saying that what they in his organization, they did it in terms of carbon costs. You were given a
Mm.
carbon budget, and that's what you live by, each year. That was your travel budget, was in terms of carbon
Wow.
units.
Oh,
And I think,
wow.
that's the way we need to start thinking, is like there's a carbon cost to everything. And can we sort of, you don't have to live the monastic lifestyle, and not have any fun or anything like that. You
Right.
just have to understand what's my carbon budget, and I
Mm.
want to spend carbon on this, and I want to spend carbon on travel to go somewhere. I want a vacation. So because of that, I'm going to reduce my carbon costs, in some other area,
Mm.
till I sort of even things out again. And but
Uh,
we don't think that way at all, and we're not taught that way at all.
mm. That's an interesting thing, discussing the 2020 pandemic where it shut everything down and people had to go to Zoom, especially for the convergence of travel to these meetings you were going to have possibly worldwide. Have you noticed a bigger increase of more meetings taking place on Zoom, whether it be conferences you have to go to, or you have the ability to check in via Zoom and do your presentations or something that way instead of having to literally travel across the United States or the world?
I think there's like a real Zoom fatigue, and unfortunately,
Mm.
I really sort of was intrigued with what was happening, which is, okay, we're having meetings, we're doing what we need to do to converse with each other and exchange ideas, and we're not traveling. But that idea, I think, has gone away really rapidly. You don't see that there. I think there is a concept of hybrid meetings, and you'll probably always see those where it's in person and also remote through Zoom. But I think that the preference most people have now is for in-person meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the feeling is, and it's true, a lot of what happens professionally is through conversations with people. And that's a big part about scientific meetings. It's not just to present the new ideas that are being presented, but also meeting people and getting to talk with them in the hallways and stuff. And that just never worked out with Zoom at all. It was good for exchanging ideas and formal presentations, but it wasn't
Right.
good for that side conversation.
Yeah, that is the hard part that we're still feeling, even in the college realm that Ryan and I are both in. There's still that back and forth. Um, we have one more listener question, and it's from an artist named Benjamin Keating Studio from Instagram. A little history about him. He had a piece in a recent Pacific Bonsai Museum exhibit that was called Avant Garden, and he is a prolific artist in not die casting, but similar elements of that and things in that way, in foraging and whatnot with metal. And he created this really cool experimental planting and structure that they have full time at the Pacific Bonsai Museum. I was able to discuss it with him. Listeners, be on the lookout. There may be something released here in the future with him talking about his adventures. But his question is, when will my climate turn tropical? Laugh out loud.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I don't know if
he's in Brooklyn, New York. So
yeah. Okay. So tropical means both heat and moisture.
Right.
Well, I don't know what's going on with New York, but I can tell you what's going on in Denver. And the expectation is that the climate will become more Phoenix-like, and
Wow.
the expectation is that could be starting to happen over the next 20 years or so. So I would say on a fairly rapid time scale, we could see a shift from what is, to be quite honest, just an incredibly beautiful, landscape and climate. If you like snow and, if you like the seasons, Colorado's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
nice place, to what's really going to become sort of we're technically in a semi-arid climate. We will be shifting to an arid desert climate, and then you
Yeah.
just wonder how will the landscape respond to that.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
big
what
question too.
what will we be growing in our residential lands in urban landscapes,
Mhm.
Yeah.
in response to that? I have no idea.
A lot of plants and pots, maybe.
So, kind of on that same point, coincidentally today, uh, uh, we have had a new USDA hardiness map that got released. So they shifted the time frame that the data was looking at. So now it's like 1990 to 2023 average minimum winter temperature. Have you seen any forecasts like for what that map is going to look like in 2050, which is kind of one of the big climate goalposts that we hear a lot of the times?
No, I actually haven't seen that. But wait, this is a new update that was just
Yep.
released?
Yep. They just
Okay,
updated it today.
I'll
Mhm.
have to look for that because I know that when I got moved here to Colorado, we were in zone 5 and now we're zone 6.
Hmm.
But I look at where zone 6 goes and like, there's no way, you know, we, yes, I think in terms of these things like minimum temperature, yes, we've shifted it to that. But then the climate here is so complex that
Mhm.
um, I'm still just amazed to see. And Kevin, you were saying you're zone 7 now, which
Yeah, what I've been,
which
yeah, because in
because I
Columbus
yeah
proper, being the heat index, not heat island, for the city itself is zone 7. I've been told for the
yeah
last 4 years. Mind you, I've only lived in Ohio now for almost 6 years now. From Oregon, and so I
yeah
lived there till I was 30, then moved out here, being 35 now. Um, it's quite a difference in just what I've experienced in the last year-to-year basis too, of temperature, different spring. We have a really hot June now, as opposed to like a really wet,
yeah
hot August. And you were saying,
yeah. So I think I think these hardiness zone maps are sort of a way of visualizing climate change, and it's based
hmm,
on climate record, 30-year records and things like that. So, and it's really simple, the minimum temperature. So we're seeing a change that way. But what I would say is we're also seeing like our climates become much more complex. And so,
Mm,
yes, we might, uh, the Front Range of Colorado, the Denver metro area might be um, considered zone 6, but in terms of minimum temperature. But don't forget, we're also we can still have that snow in September.
mm,
And, we can
right.
get, 6 or 8 inches in early September. And then one day, and this happened a couple of years ago, it was 80 degrees. Then we got a big dump of snow and then it got back to 80 again. Yeah,
Wow.
that is harsh for
Anything.
anything to deal with. And we're seeing so I think our conceptualization of what climate is and the conditions under which our trees are growing really needs to change too.
Mm, mm.
But I think the hardiness zones is a manifestation. Yeah, I'll have to look and see what Colorado shows up now on that map.
Yeah,
Mm.
same. I want to see what Oregon's at. I heard it was almost a zone 8 in some parts, um, being that's traditionally a zone 7. It's gonna be
And I
interesting.
guess I still have this like old view of these climate zones where, you're talking about 7 and 8. You're talking, to me, you're always talking at the south. That's sort of
Mm,
what
mm,
I think of. And I still, the like North Carolina, maybe even Virginia. I can't remember what Virginia was, but
Mm.
those regions, and to think that Ohio is actually sort of in that kind of climate now is kind of crazy.
right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just
Well, I should say just disturbing, I guess, because
everything, every emotion day to
yeah,
day.
a lot of emotions come out from that.
The saying goes in Ohio for weather, you wait 15 minutes, it'll change. I always say the news forecast meteorologist just flip a coin, be like, yeah, heads will be this way today, tails will be that way, because it's just ever so shifting. And since I've been here and Ryan's been here since he's a kid, I'm sure you can attest to that too. Um, Real quick, Gordon, I know we've had you for a good amount of time. I've had one question picking at my brain that was just like there was nowhere to fit it in what we were talking about. I didn't want to get off topic too far off. But being that I saved this question for last, it'll be perfect, I think. Of all the books you've authored that I've seen that you listed and then, did some
Mhm.
deep dive research in your stuff, there's one that stands out to me.
Yeah, I bet you it does.
And it's within recent, early thousands. The title of it is The Edge of Mosby's Sword, the life of Confederate colonial William Henry Chapman. With all your data and research and books you've published and articles, how did you go about to this completely? I've never read it, so is there anything touching on the ecosystems in the book, or
No,
I had
no,
to
not
double
at all.
check it was the right Gordon.
Yeah, no, that's me. Yeah, no, that came out about he was a relative, my great great grandfather, who was
Oh
in
wow.
the Civil War and was in a really well-known, famous cavalry unit.
Hmm.
Uh, and a lot has been written about that cavalry unit, but not about him in particular. But what happened was, my mother died, and so as sort of part of that grieving process, my uncle, her brother, gave me a book, a sort of a self. Somebody had published a book about William Chapman's brother, who was also they were in the Civil War together, and it occurred to me that, well, if somebody could find enough material to write a book about the brother, Samuel Chapman, I should be able to find material to write about William Chapman.
Hmm.
Um, and so it sort of came as a grieving process, like after my mother died, and then
Hmm.
also her brother shortly died after that, and that whole generation that actually had direct knowledge of that person, we're dying out. And I realized that if I didn't actually try to track down some of this stuff, it would just be lost. And I think that uh, perception is even more apparent now because uh, when I look at sort of like my kids, myself, they don't really have any interest in family history or
Hmm.
yeah, and so they've sort of I see like I'm this last link to this knowledge.
Yeah.
And so I was very fortunate, to being a scientist and having research skills and stuff like that, to know how to track down information and find it. A lot of it was actually family information. I met a lot of family members that I didn't even know existed. And
Oh
a
wow.
lot of people had information that they had just kept in boxes. And so
Hmm.
I was really surprised to find that there was enough information to warrant a book. And then I was even more surprised to find that there was enough of a book that somebody was willing to publish it. So, but that's
What
how it came about. Yeah.
is it? Just one more question with that. What's been the response to the book?
These are academic books, and these are not bestsellers and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
I do
Okay.
I do get my royalties each year. I think
Nice.
for
Nice.
that I think for that book it's on the order of $25 a year is what I get for it.
Okay. Okay.
um, yeah, I think it's done okay. I think it was published by Southern Illinois University Press, and
Hmm.
they were a great organization. They really helped with the editing of it, and really they're the ones who came up with the title of the book.
Hmm.
I had a bland title, and they did a brainstorming session and came up with that. And uh, I really enjoyed working with them. It's a small university press, and I think it filled the market. I guess maybe I'll say, maybe my claim to fame from all that is at the Manassas battlefield in outside of Washington, D.C. Um, they have supposedly put a new exhibit, a marker on the battlefield related to William Chapman, because prior to being in the cavalry, he was in the artillery and he was involved in the Battle of Manassas, and his artillery unit was very impactful during the battle. And they didn't know anything about this. The National Park Service didn't. But I got contacted several years ago about that, and they wanted to verify a few things. And they actually wanted a picture of William Chapman that I sent to them, and they were going to put like a marker at the spot where his unit was stationed
Wow.
during the battle. But I've never been to DC. I've never been back to verify that. But that's sort of on my to-do list. If I get back east, is did they actually do follow up on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If not, where's my
So
picture? Give it back.
so I guess in some ways it was impactful. It changed the history of the Manassas National Park battlefield.
That sounds like quite an experience of a joyful, cathartic, familial tie, and then to your experience of being able to have some part of the history explained and also just the value of information, right?
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm yeah, that's awesome. Gordon, it's been 2 hours. We appreciate your time. I know that's a long conversation, but I've learned a lot. Ryan, yourself?
Definitely learned a lot. We
Like,
appreciate all of your climate insights and how we can apply it to our bonsai trees.
yeah, and even
Yeah.
just our lives.
Yeah.
That too,
Yeah. I
yeah.
appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. This has been really fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we may have some people that have some questions, is there a way that they can reach you, or specifically that's best to contact you?
Yeah, I would say through my work email, which is the one that you have,
Okay.
Kevin. That's the best way. I'm still, yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay. Well, if you're okay and we have your blessing, we'll post that on our show notes so people can find you and reach
Yeah,
out if they want more information. Or
yeah,
is it with your company and the things you do? Are you looking for people to help out or volunteer or anything in that way where people can get involved if they're interested from the public sector?
yeah. We're an academic sort of research organization. We're not a government agency, but we are all scientists doing research, and so it's very much sort of academic research is what we do. So there's not really ways for there is. I will say that there is. We don't. I don't. I'm not doing it with my research, but there is something called citizen science,
Hmm.
and that's a really big part of science being done at universities now. Is how do you engage not just undergraduates and graduate students in research, but how do you get citizens involved with it? A lot of it is actually related to phenology. For
Hmm.
example, just sort of taking records of when the leaves come off come out in the springtime when they drop in the fall. So that's a big aspect of citizen scientists. Birding is and bird census is another big aspect of citizen science. So there are lots of there are ways that the public can get involved with science, but you have to sort of find what those opportunities are, and they're usually through local universities.
Well, it's great information. No, I know people want to get more involved if they have time and considerations for our environment and our impact too. Do you do any teaching at any colleges or anything?
I've done like guest lectures, and I actually did teach once a long time ago a class at University of Colorado. But I personally find it difficult if you're not doing it regularly, particularly the idea of guest lectures, of just walking in cold and not knowing the students or anything like that and talking. I can do it, but I don't necessarily find it as a way of really getting to know the students and really feeling like you're engaging with them and sort of changing their way of thinking.
Hmm.
So no, so I haven't done I don't do too much of that. That's why I mean, to be honest, that's why I write books, is because I do
Hmm.
feel like I have knowledge that I've gained by developing and using these models that are important to get out there. And since I don't teach, I do it by writing. I write books instead.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to get around that. Again, Gordon, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to get on and talk again, please let us know.
Well, no, yeah, that's fine. This is really fun. I enjoyed talking to you guys. I also really appreciate that you guys are non-traditional students. You're going back to school and
Yeah,
getting stuff
yeah.
done. And it's a busy life to be doing this, a podcast, bonsai, and going, education.
Hmm.
And that keeps you guys going, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
This is
Definitely.
how we de-stress. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Again, Gordon, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future, bonsai related. I'm going to try to get out to Colorado sooner than later, and I'll hit you up when I'm out there. Sound good?
Yeah, no, definitely. If you can get out to Colorado again, let me know. It'd be fun
Will
to
do.
catch up with you.
We'll do. Ryan
Okay.
should come with me. Have a
Yeah.
good night.
Yeah.
nice
Yeah,
meeting you,
thanks.
Gordon. Today's episode was recorded, edited, and produced by Ryan Houston, Kevin Ferris, and Kelly Louie. To find out more and see pictures relevant to today's topic or sponsors, see the show notes linked in the description or at bonsaitimepodcast.com. To submit questions, suggestions, or tree pictures for future discussion, find the contact form also on our website, or message us directly at bonsaitimepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support us in making more episodes, consider rating us, sharing with friends, donating, or becoming a sponsor. Our music was provided by MIDI Cancer. To find more of their work, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To stay in touch with us, subscribe to us in your podcast app, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Bonsai Time Podcast, or on TikTok at Bonsai Time Pod. Also, Kevin and Kelly are at Kevin_Ferris PNW and Bonsai with Kelly, respectively, on Instagram. And Ryan is invivobonsai.com and on all social media. Remember, have fun and bonsai on.